Texas Comptroller Glenn Hegar, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
It's good to be with you again.
Good to be with you. Your agency released in early October that at the end of the next biennium, the 2025 fiscal year, the state will have about an $18 billion surplus and nearly $24 billion in the rainy day fund. What is driving all that?
Texas, we're very fortunate. The economic growth that we're having in the state, we've had substantially over the last decade plus and predicted to continue. Obviously, the business climate, people want to continue to move to Texas every morning. When we wake up in Texas, we have roughly another 1,300 people that call Texas home every day, which is just hard to imagine. I challenge people to think about that for the next week. I mean, the point is, all these people want to move here for an economic opportunity. Half of those roughly are moving to Texas, half of those are growth in the state, natural growth, births minus deaths. But then also you have businesses that are wanting to relocate, set up headquarters in Texas. So all of that growth has principally in part driven the economic opportunities in Texas. Now, of course, in the past so many years, we had record high inflation, which added to the treasury. Unfortunately, because things cost more, we obviously derive more revenues from taxes off of those items that cost more. But right now, the economy's continued to perform. But with that being said, even though in this current 2-year budget, we are projecting today to still have just a hard imagine in Texas an $18 billion surplus when this budget is finished in 2 years from now, as well as you mentioned our state savings account, economic stabilization fund, or rainy day fund having 24 billion in it, which is substantially different than many other states where some of those states are either flat and or actually have deficits, which is pretty remarkable. But with all that being said, I have continued to caution that there are a lot of economic uncertainties, not just within the nation, but around the globe right now.
And what is your level of concern that there still could be a recession? I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about this over the years, but then technically we haven't been in one. The economy
That's right.
continues
That's
to
right.
grow. So
not
how
not
is
not just here in Texas, but in the United States, we have not had a recession, and obviously we hope that we do not. One of the things in Texas, I think we're probably not to the same level that some other states in the nation may have a recession yet next year. Where Texas, we don't project one right now, but obviously we have higher interest rates continue to be. So therefore, if you and I try to purchase a home, we try to purchase a vehicle, that causes more out of our pocket, our discretionary opportunity spending to have to be spent on those items. So therefore, that's less money that we put into the economy. Budgets are strained more for those on a lower income perspective right now. And so all of these things not just hamper us as individuals, but also businesses. And so those things that exist globally, obviously the unfortunate wars that are going on, whether that's the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Hamas attacks in Israel, all of these global things impact supply chains, impact the economic impacts around the world, and has an effect also in Texas to some degree.
let's talk about the November election. Texas voters approved most of the constitutional amendments, and they created a lot of different funds. We're talking about the Texas Energy Fund, the Water Fund, the fund for broadband, a fund for state parks, and also the university fund for research, plus a number of tax breaks for homeowners, child care facilities, and also manufacturers of medical and biological medical products. So I'm wondering, how are all those funded?
Yeah, great question. So as we were entering into this year, as the legislature was coming into the regular session, we had a record historical, unprecedented budget surplus, one that we had never seen. Just even the size and scope of Texas had paled in comparison in the previous years. So one of the points that I had made to the legislature, and leadership had continued to echo these same comments, is one, we need to make sure to provide relief to the taxpayer and property cuts, something that was significant, which was done in the November ballot as well as the legislature. And then also make sure that the good times that we're having right now in budget surpluses is not going to happen forever. There will be a recession at some point in our lifetime in the out years, and so therefore government's going to have to tighten its belt. So what you can do with these is use one-time type investments for road infrastructure, water infrastructure, electrical grid infrastructure, the things that you and I use on a daily basis, broadband infrastructure. If you go to certain parts of the state, you can't have this communication service that we're having today. And so those were the things that were on the constitutional amendment. The legislature was using part of that surplus that was bigger than the one we were just talking about, using those for one-time investments to invest in infrastructure and things that you and I can use today, and future generations will continue to benefit from and have greater economic opportunities in Texas as we have better road service, water service, broadband service, making sure our electric grid works, and investing in our university systems.
So you're saying that third part of that $33 billion in the surplus that we had coming into this session was used for these funds specifically. So they're one-offs, right?
That is exactly correct. And that's why the legislature created them as one-off. So therefore, they're not reoccurring. It's something that happens one time. The investment, as you mentioned, for example, that we just talked about as well, in our Texas park systems, $1 billion, which is just an astonishing amount of money. But we have a lot of great historical treasures in Texas, investing in those one time. So that's not something that will be reoccurring on all these different funds. So therefore, the legislature tried to make prudent actions to invest in Texas, but do it in a one-time situation to where we use that surplus, but we don't have to dip back into it again.
And so that's why it's able to live outside of a normal budget, right?
Yeah, and so that's exactly right. And so what some have will do is say, for example, whether it is the park funding that we just mentioned, or the university funding, or whether it is for the electric grid, those funds, now that they have been passed, will be put in a special account. Many of them are going to be invested or managed by my office. And then when Parks and Wildlife, the department that manages our state parks, needs those dollars, we will work with them as they will draw down on those dollars over time. And then hopefully also is to continue to grow those funds over time. So therefore they continue to last for several years and even generations.
But is this a smart way of doing business? In other words, so that if they live outside the budget, they're one-offs. It's not something that lawmakers have to, if they are going to continue to fund, do it through surpluses, not regular budgeting.
Well, I think it's really prudent to make sure that when you do have times of plenty, that you make sure you give back to the taxpayers, and you also use those opportunities for one time. And by setting those aside, there's still the accounting, there's the transparency, there will be making sure that we account for all of those dollars so the taxpayers know where those dollars are at, how they're being managed, how they're being spent. So all that government transparency is going to be there. So yes, I do think this was the most prudent way that the legislature could take and use our tax dollars in a way that'll help us, not just today, but in future generations.
And going back to that nearly or the little more than $18 billion in projected surplus money at the end of 2025, will there still be room then for additional either property tax cuts or other ways to give back to the citizens of Texas?
Yeah, the first key word that you just mentioned is projected, because it is projected. It's for currently finishing out this year, this calendar year that we're in, just have a little over a month to go in 2023, as well as throughout 2024, and then through the first 8 months of 2025. So we're looking out a very long time into the future. So therefore, the economy could be better, could be worse. And that's why I mentioned that caution. While we don't expect a recession in Texas right now, I do caution that there's a lot of uncertainty in the global economy, as we were talking about earlier. And so therefore, the point being is it is a projection, but with that projection, if it holds true, then those funds will be enabled that the legislature can possibly do other types of one-time investments for Texas at that time, and or tax cuts of some measure.
I wanted to ask you, speaking of costs that live outside of budget, I know that the lieutenant governor called for an accounting of all the money that was spent regarding the impeachment of Attorney General Ken Paxton. So that money was spent, but is that outside of the budget? I mean, how would that work?
Yeah, that's part of the expenses that the Texas Senate, the Texas House, they have budgets, just like my agency has budgets, or any agency will have a budget. The judiciary has a budget, the governor's office has a budget. And so therefore they have a budget that they can utilize. And therefore part of those expenses were bought out of the House budget, as in the membership, as well as the Senate budget. And all of those dollars, whether any type of way that the government is spending are tax dollars, those are always accounted for and made sure to be readily available for people to understand how they're used, and they should be.
Your office bought $20 million in funds for Israeli bonds. Why was that important, and what do you estimate is the return on investment?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we continue to support our partner Israel. And my agency here, since I've been here, as part of our investment portfolio, we buy a variety of different investments. One of those are bonds, and a piece of those bonds have been Israeli bonds over the years. And so therefore, after the conflict started, Hamas invasion of Israel and the terrible tragedies, they reached out because they were trying to raise money to support the war effort, to support the government. And so we initially pledged $20 million as a purchase. Since then, we've also purchased another $45 million in bonds. So the state, through my agency, has over $100 million worth of bonds. And so a few other states do as well. And so right now, we're expected to earn on both of those two recent purchases over 5% interest. And so therefore, I think one is 5.2 and one is almost a 5.4% interest. So it's a good investment for us as the state, but it's also a good investment for Israel because they're a way to immediately go out to the market, tap into resources that they desperately need for their citizens right now.
And will you continue this?
We have for a very long time, but obviously the first and foremost thing that we look at is the investment angle from the state. That's one that we're going to look at. And so they have not reached out to ask for another round of bonds, but if they do, we're going to look at it and probably will continue to invest as we have in the past for a very long time. In the years that I've been here, we've continued to invest in Israel bond and support our partners.
Um, Recently, Jamie Dimon spoke out about Texas and its policies regarding ESG. And I'm wondering what he didn't really come out and criticize the state, but he said the state, if I remember correctly, should be careful about penalizing companies for their ESG. What was your response when you heard
Yeah.
that?
If
And
you
can you talk a little bit about the
Yeah,
policy?
just one quick as a background. My office, one of the things that we were tasked to do a couple years ago by the legislature is identify companies, financial institutions, as well as investment opportunities through different companies that are boycotting the oil and gas industry. And so that's a component of ESG. We talk about ESG. G stands for governance, which has actually been around for a long time, our governing structure. So that's nothing new. But E, environmental, and S, social, which nobody can really define for me. These are really terms that are used quite a bit. And you have a lot of companies that say they're doing ESG investments, but actually it's in name only, and it's really a marketing tool. And so what we've tried to do is bring transparency to what these terms mean, to bring transparency and making sure that if they are boycotting the oil and gas industry, then the state of Texas, not any or just state funds, are not going to be invested in those. And so I think the most important part, and I think a lot of this, and I've talked to Jamie a couple different times, a couple times we've visited on this issue. The fact is making sure that you have a very clear, transparent process so the companies know how they get on your list or how they get off of your list. And that's one thing that some states and some entities are not having a very transparent. So they're really using it more politically and not using it to make sure that there's a counterbalance to some of these efforts to divest of oil and gas. For example, right now, Jack, you're wearing your glasses. If we did not invest in oil and gas, you wouldn't be able to see me right now because you have the glasses and they're made of a petroleum product. You and I wouldn't be able to have this conversation through these computers because there's a lot of the components that are made of petroleum products. And so what we've tried to do in my agency and my efforts is make sure that people understand the connectivity that the oil and gas industry has to our daily lives. Two of the first things that you do in the morning is you touch a toothbrush and you touch a tube of toothpaste. Guess what? Both of those are made with petroleum-based products. And so the point being is we have to be very cautious of how we talk about this and make sure that people understand the connectivity to our lives, and also understanding that not doing certain things has significant consequences to the economy and the well-being of people. And so, Jamie's talked about this as quite a bit, and I think that's really more of the issue, is making sure that when government is going in these directions, both sides of it is being open, honest, and transparent. And I think that's a key critical component, which is what we've strived for here in this agency as we produced our list.
Did have one other question for you, and I appreciate your time, and that is on your efforts to prevent organized retail theft. We're in the Christmas shopping season right now, and you see online various thefts where a whole bunch of people go in and loot a store. Is that happening in Texas, and what are you doing to prevent it?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is happening in Texas, and what we've seen is the legislature this last session had an effort to try to identify what do they need to do to take better actions. And so, at the end of the day, what they did is they said, "Hey, Glenn Hegar, will you create a task force on organized retail crime and put together a report for us as what is the issue here in Texas?" Because we see this on TV more so in other states, but it actually is occurring here in the state of Texas. And so what you have is these kind of smash and grabs, these organizations, whether it's local gangs or international gangs that are moving from city to city, and they come in, they go into retail outlets. And really what part of the issue is it's also a safety issue for the people who are working in these stores, and you and I, who are the consumers in the stores, because the stores have seen violence rate tick up with these types of crimes and these types of robberies. And the ability to sell products online today compared to in the past has enabled these types of crimes even more than before. And so it has increased significantly, and it's an issue that we have got to address for the safety of our citizens, and also making sure the safety of the people who are working in the stores.
So you're saying the legislature is going to have to deal with this next session?
Yeah, I think the main thing right now is trying to identify what are the best ways of working together with many local law enforcement jurisdictions, and also making sure that they have the tools that they need to work together. The retailers are working with law enforcement because they play a role in this, and also making sure that local prosecutors are doing their job and following the law and prosecuting these crimes from one jurisdiction to the next.
Texas Comptroller Glenn Hegar, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Always good to be with you.